And we are back. Another beautiful spring day. We are aboard the Scott Ransom 900. This thing is so techy, shreds so hard. I've really enjoyed my time on this bike. So this Ransom has 170 millimeters of travel up front, 170 in the rear. But if you do hit this single, instead of going all the way, you just half press on this middle lever, you get 130 millimeter travel in the rear. So that's pretty cool. You can kind of volume adjust down. But yeah, this thing is marketed as a absolute shredder, designed to like kind of give the rider confidence. And that has been my experience. And this bike has just kind of been a joy to be on from the first ride I took it down. Starting off with the climb, it does feel like it's a fairly decently forward seat position. It's got over a 77-degree seat tube angle. I do feel like I sit a little bit further back on the bike, and I do have the seat all the way forward on the rails. This bike's got a 440 millimeter chainstay, which does help to kind of keep your front end down while climbing. But on this bike, I've been very drawn to using the climb lever down here. You just can't deny how easy that is to hit. And, you know, it's just so easy to hit that I don't know if I've done a climb yet without hitting it. And it's kind of funny because I'm the kind of guy that never hits the climb lever unless I'm on like a paved road or something like that. This thing does feel fairly efficient uphill, which is quite impressive because you're dealing with a double down max grip assegai up front and also a dissector, which does roll faster, but also with double down casing. Fortunately for me today, not max grip. And that dissector does seem to do just like an incredible job of damping on the downhills, but for the climb, keeps things moving a little bit. Because for me, double down casings, I can almost always feel them. They definitely take away quite a few watts. But despite that, the Ransom moves pretty darn good climbing up the hill, carrying its 170 millimeters of suspension. But then when you go to hit that lever all the way, you get tons of support. And then halfway, you get this super fun poppy 130 travel. So basically, I find that this bike does super well, maybe up to like a 12% grade. And then when you get above that 12% grade, you start to feel like you got to kind of shift your weight forward onto the peak of the saddle. And the cool thing though is if you want to generate traction uphill, this bike is so supple, which we'll get to on the downhill. Time for the good part of this review as we plunge downhill. Should be a little wet out here today, but I think the conditions will be improving rapidly with the sun out. Oh man, yeah, so this bike is just a force to be reckoned with on the downhills. The first time I rode it was on this trail, super sloppy conditions, and I couldn't believe how immediately kind of predictable and reliable it felt. Well, you were kind of opening up speed. It's definitely a very intuitive bike for me, just kind of right off the bat. And for sure, the first thing I noticed was the way that the suspension linkage was kind of working. Like those roots back there can get very slippy in the wet. And something about this bike and perhaps the tire combo, it just is very confidence inspiring, which is something they were going for. And I would say they just kind of nailed. You just feel like you can send it into things a little bit harder on this bike. I'm so impressed that these really good suspension kinematics are possible without any sort of high pivot design. You still just get a normal chain, and the efficiency that comes with that. I'm just like so impressed with how this thing just kind of maintains traction over exceptionally bumpy parts of trail. Yo! And you just feel like you can kind of dive into the crud and it's gonna work out. Like it's got a fairly long feeling presence. And makes things feel stable. And I guess part of that is like, they seem to have just nailed the perfect kind of wheelbase that feels great at speed, but doesn't feel too cumbersome. This bike does seem to ride quite a bit further into its travel, but yet doesn't feel too ground hugging and like it's killing the pop. Definitely a little bit more on the ground hugging suspension curve side of things. And I'm wondering if part of the reason why this suspension feels so good is because of the kind of rearward axle path movement out of that 6-bar. I'm not sure, but certainly the kind of leverage ratio and the way that it changes throughout the stroke is just really incredible. Man, this bike is so fun. And it feels like it just definitely wants you to kind of push in, get off the brakes, and just kind of send it. Yeah, pushing out of that corner felt pretty good, but definitely more of a, you feel like you're on just this super light downhill bike. At least that's the kind of way I describe it, but without feeling at all cumbersome. Scott clearly put their time in with the rear shock implementation, and it's so free-flowing on the rear shock and active, which is kind of my favorite style of shock tune. Oh man, it's pumped its way through there quite nicely. And the frame stiffness is kind of middle of the road, which I do appreciate. Not too stiff, but it feels very secure. I'm coming back from an elbow injury, and one of the things I really appreciate about this bike is its soft touch. It just feels like you can just send it down very nasty terrain and you get a pretty soft experience. Just feels so good just to plow and charge into everything. Been riding this thing with my buddies, and I think the verdict is that this is probably the best looking implementation of this hidden shock layout. Hello. And yeah, you just feel like you can kind of not worry as much about just kind of sending it into stuff with this bike. Just feel like it's got your back. It does feel quite racy as well. Like it allows you to kind of keep your cool when things get hectic and you're flying down the mountain and you're pedaling hard. Also be cool to have that lockout switch and travel reducer on hand if you were racing, which is basically what this bike was developed for. Yeah, that drop felt like nothing. It's a very plushly given 170 millimeters of travel. That's a lot of travel, but Yeah, this bike just delivers it very well in the way that you would want to deliver it since you have so much travel on hand. I think it pays off to let these bikes ride deeper into the travel. They really just crush that. The build spec they gave us has just been amazing. I think one of the more standout features has been these new Code Stealth Ultimate brakes. They have a lot more feel and definition, maybe even power, than any other Code I can remember riding. They're a lot more it's easier to know where the pad contact is and just kind of be in control of these brakes, and the aluminum or the carbon fiber levers just feel pretty killer. Phew. Yeah, it feels pretty good to throw a couple pedal strokes on this bike too while you're going downhill. Doesn't feel wrong. Feels like it's rewarded. Yeah. I feel like I'm kind of shushing the rear end around in a nice way. That 440 millimeter chainstay isn't too big. It sure does keep things stable. Got less than a 64-degree head tube angle. Just feels right for a bike like this. Keeps things nice and calm. I like the bar height on this bike as well. So who's this bike for? I'd say this bike is for somebody just looking to send it. They're a more technical person. They like having all the features and the levers and the hidden shock, and it's all very exciting, and I feel like it's all very well implemented on this bike. Super impressive. It's very clean and well thought out feeling. I also think somebody who's just looking for like a very impressive rear shock linkage but doesn't want to go with the high pivot design, this bike is just phenomenal. So if you enjoyed the review, consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. And for the full write-up, head on over to freehub.com. Ooh.